Orchestrated fresh story framework with new characters, avoiding prior names. Orchestrated fresh story framework with new characters, avoiding prior names. The note came folded inside a paper napkin, slid into my lap under the table so smoothly that for half a second I thought my daughter-in-law had only meant to pass the gravy boat. Then her hand found my wrist, just for a moment, and squeezed. I unfolded it below the tablecloth where nobody could see, and the words swam up at me in her quick, slanted handwriting. Pop, go check your retirement accounts right now. On your phone, in the bathroom. Don't react out here. When you come back, say your stomach's bothering you and let me drive you home. Please, trust me. Hannah. I am 67 years old, and I have shaken hands with the live 220 line a couple of times in 40 years of electrical work, and I will tell you that the cold that went through me reading those words was worse than any of that. I looked up. Hannah was passing the dish of green beans to her son like nothing in the world was wrong, smiling at something my daughter had said, the picture of a tired young mother at Thanksgiving. But her jaw was tight, and across the table my son Bryce was holding court the way he always did now, leaning back in the good chair at the head of the table. My chair, the one I'd sat in for 31 years in that dining room. The one Ruth used to fill my plate from first before anybody else got served. I hadn't even noticed when he'd started sitting there. "Pop, you all right?" Bryce said, catching me staring. He had Ruth's eyes. That's the thing people never understood. My boy had his mother's warm brown eyes and a smile that had talked teachers out of failing grades and talked a loan officer into a mortgage at 26. "You look a little gray." "Long day," I said. "Think I ate too fast. I'm gonna run to the bathroom." I got up slow, the way a man with a full stomach gets up, and I walked down the hall past the wall of photographs Ruth had hung before she passed. Our wedding, the kids at the lake in Hocking Hills, Bryce in his cap and gown, Megan holding her first baby. I shut the bathroom door and sat down on the edge of the tub because I didn't trust my legs, and I pulled out my phone and logged into the Huntington app. It would not load. The little wheel just spun, and I swear every second of it took a year off my life. Then it opened. My 401k rollover IRA, the one Ruth and I had built, dollar by dollar for 37 years, every overtime check, every winter I worked freezing crawl spaces so we could put a little extra away. It read $58,000. 6 months ago it had been $612,000. I sat there and I read it 3 times because I was sure I had the wrong account up. I did not have the wrong account. I pulled the transaction history and my thumb was shaking so hard I could barely scroll. Transfer. 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 Going back to May, out to something called CHR Holdings LLC, out to a brokerage I'd never heard of, out and out and out, none of them big enough on their own to make a bank pick up the phone and call me 8,000 here, 15 there, 22 once, but added up over 6 months it was more than $500,000 gone, and every single transfer was marked authorized account holder. Authorized. Because last March, Bryce had sat at this very table after Sunday dinner and put his hand over mine and said, "Pop, you're not a young man anymore. What happens if you have a stroke like Uncle Eddie? Somebody's got to be able to handle your accounts, pay your bills, keep the lights on. I'm the one named in your will anyway. Let's just put me on the account so it's simpler." And I'd thought, what a good son, looking out for his old man. I'd signed my card at the branch myself. I'd thanked him. I ran the cold water and put my wrists under it because that's a thing Ruth used to do when she felt faint, and I tried to think like the man I used to be, the one who ran a small contracting outfit and never once let a customer stiff him. "Don't react out here," Hannah's note said. She knew. She was married to him. Whatever this was, she'd seen enough of it from the inside to slip her own father-in-law a note under the Thanksgiving table and risk her whole marriage doing it. I dried my face and I went back out there and I sat down and I smiled, and that was the hardest acting I've ever done in my life. "There he is," Bryce said. "You feeling better, Pop? Listen, while we've got everybody here, I've actually got some good news I want to share." He tapped a leather folder sitting next to his plate. I hadn't noticed it before. He'd brought a folder to Thanksgiving dinner. "I've got the next round of paperwork for the Cedar Hollow project. Now, Pop, you're already in for a good chunk, and the returns this quarter are going to blow your mind. But there's a window closing on the expansion units, and I'd hate for you to miss it. Just a couple signatures tonight, and you're set." I looked at him. My own son. "Cedar Hollow," I said. The senior living development out in Delaware County. Pop. We talked about it. You remember. He said you remember the way you'd say it to a child, gentle and a little sad, and I watched my daughter Megan glance up from her plate with a flicker of worry on her face, and I understood, all at once, exactly what he'd been doing. He'd been telling people I was slipping, building the story in front of witnesses. Poor Dad, he forgets things now. I don't think I want to sign anything tonight, I said carefully. I'm not feeling too sharp. Stomach's off. It's 2 signatures. His voice didn't change, but something underneath it did, the way a wire hums different right before it shorts. We can do it in the kitchen. Give you some quiet. Anna stood up so fast her chair scraped. Actually, I think we should get Pop home. He's been off all afternoon and the kids have got to get to bed anyway. She started gathering plates without waiting for an answer. Bryce, you stay. Finish up with everybody. I'll run your dad back to his place. It's right on the way. I'll take him, Bryce said, and he was already half out of his seat. You've had 3 glasses of wine, Hannah said lightly, not even looking at him. Stacking dishes. I've had water. I've got him. For just a second, less than a second, something crossed my son's face that I had never seen on him in 39 years, something flat and cold and calculating, and then it was gone and the smile was back. Sure, he said. Course. Pop, I'll call you tomorrow. We'll get the Cedar Hollow stuff squared away. I told everybody I loved them. I hugged my daughter. I let my grandson show me a card trick he'd been practicing. And then Hannah had her coat and my coat, and we were out the front door into a cold gray Ohio dusk. The kind of late November light that's gone by 5 o'clock, and she didn't say one word until we were 2 streets away, and she pulled the minivan into the empty lot behind the Kroger and put it in park and shut off the engine. She put both hands over her face, and her shoulders started to shake, and my daughter-in-law, who had never once in 11 years cried in front of me, cried. I'm so sorry, Pop, she said. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know if you'd believe me. He's my husband. How bad is it? I said. I saw the account. How bad is it really? She wiped her face and reached into the back and pulled out a manila folder of her own and a battered laptop, and she opened it on the console between us with the parking lot light coming on orange over the windshield. And she showed me. Hannah is a bookkeeper. She does the books for a couple of dental offices and a landscaping company. Has for years, quiet, careful work, and she had been doing the same thing in her own house without anybody asking her to, because something hadn't felt right for a long time. I started seeing money come in, she said. Big deposits, way more than the business made, and then it'd go right back out again. I thought maybe he had loans I didn't know about. Then about 3 months ago, his sister Megan mentioned you put him on your accounts for, what'd she say, estate stuff. And I got this feeling. She'd started keeping a record, a spreadsheet, going back almost a year, that she'd built from bank statements and the credit card bills she paid and the documents she'd found in his home office when he was out at one of his investor dinners. She turned the screen so I could read it. Cedar Hollow Senior Living was real, sort of. There was a parcel of land out past Sunbury. There was a glossy website and a rendering of a beautiful brick building with old folks playing cards on a sunny porch. There were investors, my friend Stan Pruitt from the Union, who'd put in $110,000. A widow named Doris from Bryce's church, who'd handed over $200,000 because she trusted him. A retired school teacher. A young couple. 11 people and all that Hannah could find. And there was almost no building. There was a fence and a portable office and a sign. The money coming in from new investors was going straight out to pay returns to the old ones and to cover the hole from Bryce's last project, a strip mall up in Marion that had gone bust 2 years before and that I never even knew existed. It's a Ponzi scheme, Hannah said, and saying the word out loud seemed to cost her something. I looked it up. That's the name for it. He pays the old people with the new people's money, and it works as long as new people keep coming, and then one day it doesn't, and tonight... She stopped. Tonight, he needed your signature, because there's a wave of returns due in January, and he doesn't have it. He's been pulling from you because you were the easiest. You trusted him the most. I sat there in that minivan and looked at the back of a grocery store and felt 40 years of my life draining out the soles of my shoes. There's more, Pop, she said very quietly, and I almost didn't bring this part, but you have to see it. She pulled 2 pages out of the manila folder. The first was a power of attorney. My name was on it. My signature was on it. A good forgery. Close enough that for one terrible second, I doubted myself. But it wasn't the simple banking authorization I'd signed at the branch. This one gave my son the right to sell my house, to liquidate my pension, to make medical decisions for me, to do anything he pleased, with everything I had. The second page was a letter on what looked like the letterhead of a memory care clinic in Dublin, signed by a Dr. Lindgren, stating that I had been evaluated and found to be in the early stages of dementia and no longer competent to manage my own financial affairs. I never met any Dr. Lindgren, I said. My voice came out strange. I've never been to that place. I know, Hannah said. It's forged. The doctor's a real person, but I'm pretty sure she never wrote it. He was building a file, Pop, so that if you ever caught on, if you ever fought back, he could go to a judge and say, "Look, my poor father's not in his right mind. I've been managing his affairs to protect him." He was going to have you declared incompetent. He was going to take the house. I thought of Ruth. I thought of the 31 years we'd lived in that house, the kids' heights penciled on the doorframe in the kitchen that we'd never painted over, the maple out front we'd planted the spring Megan was born. I thought of my son sitting at my table in my chair, lying to my face with his mother's eyes, while a forged paper sat in a folder by his plate that would have ended me as a person in the eyes of the law. And I want to tell you something, because I know how people watch these things and think I'd never. I want to tell you that the very first thing I felt, before the rage, before anything, was the urge to protect him, to make it go away quietly. He's my boy. I raised him. I taught him to throw a curveball in the backyard and to drive a stick in the church parking lot and to balance a checkbook at the kitchen table. Some animal part of me wanted to drive back there and pull him aside and say, "Son, whatever this is, let's fix it, just us. Nobody has to know." Hannah must have seen it on my face, because she said, "Stan Pruitt called us a tax per pet guy in October because he wanted to take some of his Cedar Hollow returns out, and Bryce told him there'd be a penalty, talked him out of it." Stan's 73, Pop. That's his whole life. And Doris from the church, she gave him her husband's life insurance. If we let this slide, if we keep it in the family, those people lose everything and he just does it again to somebody else. There's a name for keeping quiet about it. The name is helping him. She was right, and I knew she was right, and it didn't make it hurt any less. "What do you want to do?" she asked me. It was my decision. She'd done the hardest part already, just getting me into this van, and now she was handing the rest to me, the way it had to be. "Who do we call?" I said. She let out a long breath, like she'd been holding it for 3 months. "I already talked to somebody. I didn't give your name. I didn't give details. I just asked questions, hypothetical questions. Like, what would somebody do if they thought a family member was running a fraud? There's a financial crimes unit at the county. A Detective Reyes. She told me the most important thing is the victim has to come forward himself, has to make the report. That's you, Pop. It can't be me. It has to be you." "I'm not too proud to tell you," I cried then, in the front seat of my daughter-in-law's minivan, with a paper turkey hanging from the rear view that her kids had made at school. I cried because I was about to turn my own son in to the police, and because the person sitting next to me holding my hand while I did it was a woman who shared not one drop of my blood, who had married into this family and then watched me bleed and decided she couldn't be part of letting it happen. "Okay," I said, "call her." Detective Reyes met us that night. Thanksgiving night, can you believe it? She came into the office because Hannah told her. There were senior victims, and a signature window in January, and a man who'd run before. She was younger than I expected, maybe 45. Calm, the kind of calm that comes from having seen 100 families fall apart on the other side of her desk. She took it all in, the spreadsheet, the forged power of attorney, the fake medical letter, the bank records, and she was careful with me. She told me Hannah's records were going to be invaluable as a roadmap, but that the case had to be built on documents the bank and the brokerage would produce under subpoena. Clean, no question of where they came from. She told me I'd done the right thing and the hard thing. She told me not to tip him off. Not a word. Act normal. Screen his calls. Say I wasn't feeling well, anything. Just don't let him know. That was the worst part, the waiting. For 5 weeks I lied to my son on the phone. He called me almost every day at first, all warm and worried. "Pop, you doing okay? You had us scared at Thanksgiving. Listen, we really should get those Cedar Hollow papers done." And I'd say my stomach was still off. The doctor wanted to run some tests. Let's wait till after the holidays. I could hear it tightening in his voice as January got closer, that hum behind the words. He drove by my house twice. Once he showed up on the porch with a box of those almond cookies Ruth used to make, store-bought, and stood in my living room talking about the development like it was the realest thing in the world, and I stood there and nodded and felt like the floor was tilting under me, because I was looking at my son and seeing a stranger wearing his face, and I had to send him home with a smile and lock the door behind him and call Detective Reyes and tell her he'd come by. Megan was the part that broke me. My daughter didn't know. She called me upset because Bryce told her I was getting forgetful and maybe we needed to talk about Dad's situation. And I had to bite my tongue so hard I tasted blood, because I couldn't tell her. Couldn't risk it getting back to him before the case was ready. My own daughter, thinking her father might be losing his mind, and I couldn't reassure her. Reyes said it had to be that way. It didn't make it bearable. They arrested him on a Tuesday morning in the middle of January. I wasn't there. They executed search warrants at his office and his house the same hour, and they froze what was left of the accounts. But then the FBI was involved because some of the investor money had crossed state lines, and the Ohio Securities Division had joined in because selling fake investment units to the public is its own pile of felonies. The forged power of attorney and the fake medical letter turned out to matter as much as the theft, because Detective Reyes said juries forgive a lot when it comes to money, but they do not forgive a man trying to have his own father declared insane to steal his house. Megan called me screaming and crying that morning, thinking it was some terrible mistake. And I drove over to her place and I sat her down and I told her everything. Every bit of it. And I watched my daughter's whole picture of her brother come apart in her hands. She didn't believe me at first. Then I showed her the forged dementia letter with my name on it, and she got very quiet, and then she got very angry, and then she just held on to me. She and Hannah have leaned on each other through all of it. The two of them, the daughter and the daughter-in-law, holding the family together while the son, who was supposed to be the strong one, sat in the county jail. The case took most of a year. His lawyer talked tough at first about how it was all a business deal gone bad, an ordinary investment that failed, no different than 1,000 others. But you cannot explain away forgery. You cannot explain away a fabricated medical evaluation. Detective Reyes and the prosecutors built it brick by brick, and in the end, faced with all of it, he pleaded guilty rather than put Doris from the church and Stan from the union and his own father on the stand. He was sentenced to 14 years in state prison and ordered to pay restitution he will likely never finish paying. And I'll be honest with you, when the judge read out 14 years, I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a man watching his own son go through a door that would close for a very long time. I felt Ruth's absence beside me like a missing tooth. But I also looked over and saw Stan Pruitt nodding slowly with tears on his face and Doris with her hands folded, and I knew it was right, even though right and good are not always the same thing. People ask me about the money because that's what everybody wants to know. Here's the truth of it, plain. The lawyers in the court froze what they could, and the FBI clawed back some of the money he'd moved around, and there was a little equity in his own house, and a boat and a truck that got sold off. I got back about $210,000 of my $600 better than a lot of fraud victims ever see, the prosecutor told me, because Hannah caught it early enough that some of it hadn't been spent yet. Stan got most of his back. Doris, God bless her, got nearly all of it, because I'll admit I went to Detective Reyes and the prosecutor and asked, as a victim, that the church widow be made whole first out of whatever was recovered before me. They could do that. I wanted that. But $200,000 isn't $600,000. And I'm 67, and I don't have another 40 years of overtime in me. So I sold the house. Not because the court made me. Because I couldn't walk through those rooms anymore. Every doorway had a memory of him in it. I'd see him at 8 years old on the stairs, and at 39 years old at my dinner table with a folder full of forgeries, and the two boys couldn't live in the same house in my head. I sold it in the spring and I moved into a 2-bedroom in Westerville. Ground floor, no stairs, and I took a part-time job 3 days a week at the parts counter of an electrical supply house, where I knew the owner from the trade, because the truth is I'm better off than most, but I'm not as well off as I was. And because sitting alone in a new apartment with my own thoughts is its own kind of slow poison. The work keeps my hands busy and my mind from circling the drain. Here's what nobody tells you about being robbed by your own child. It isn't the money that takes the longest to come back. The money is just numbers. It's the trust. I used to be a man who believed that if you raised a child right and loved him hard and showed up to every game and every recital, he would turn out right, because love was an investment that always paid. I don't believe that anymore, and I'm still learning to live in a world where that isn't true, where a person can carry your wife's eyes and your own last name and still sit across a holiday table and lie you out of everything you have. I started talking about it. That's the other thing. About 8 months after the sentencing, I got asked to speak to a seniors group at the library in town, and I stood up shaking and told them my story. And afterward, this line formed of old men and old women who wanted to tell me quietly that it had happened to them too, or that they'd been afraid it was starting to. So I kept doing it. I talk to church groups and senior centers and a couple of retirement communities now, and I tell them what I missed. All of it. The push to put a family member on the accounts to make things easier. The little drumbeat of dads getting forgetful in front of other people, which is sometimes love and is sometimes a man laying the groundwork to take you apart. The transfers small enough to slip under the bank's notice. I tell them what the FBI told me, that elder financial fraud in this country runs into the tens of billions of dollars a year, that more often than not, the person doing it is family, and that it goes unreported as often as not, because the victim is ashamed, or because they can't stand to send their own child to prison, or because part of them would rather lose the money than lose the lie that their family is what they always believed it was. I tell them to keep their own accounts, to read every page before they sign it, and to never let anybody rush them through a signature, family least of all. To call a lawyer, they found themselves, not one a relative recommended. And I tell them the hardest one, the one I had to learn at 67 in the front seat of a minivan. If your gut tells you something is wrong, it is almost always trying to save your life. And the people who love you most are not always the ones whose love you to bet on. Bryce writes me letters from the prison up in Marion. They come to Megan's house because he doesn't have my new address, and she brings them over unopened and sets them on my counter, and I put them in a drawer. I haven't read one yet. Maybe someday I'll be ready to hear what he has to say. Maybe I won't. His kids, my grandkids, they're getting older, and they know their dad's in prison. And Hannah has done the impossible work of telling them the truth in pieces they can carry, that their father did something very wrong and is being punished, and that none of it is their fault, and that they are loved. She never poisoned them against him, and she never lied to them either. And I don't know how she walks that line, but she does it every day. Hannah and I have breakfast every Saturday now. It started a few months after the arrest, when I called her one morning just to hear a voice that wasn't in my own head. And she said, "Come over, the kids want to see Pop." And now it's just what we do. She makes terrible coffee 2 weeks, and I tell her so every week, and she tells me to make my own then. And we sit at her kitchen table while the kids watch cartoons, and we don't talk about them much. We talk about the grandkids and her clients, and whether the Browns will break our hearts again. She's married to my son in name still, though that won't last. And she is the reason I'm not destitute, the reason 11 people aren't ruined, the reason a forged paper never landed in front of a judge declaring me out of my mind. She handed me a note under a Thanksgiving table when keeping quiet would have been so much easier, when speaking up cost her her marriage and her family and her whole settled life. She did it anyway. I lost a son this year. I won't pretend I didn't, and I won't pretend it doesn't sit on my chest some nights like a wet coat. But I learned something I wish I'd known 40 years ago, and am grateful to know even now. This late, with this much wreckage to learn it in. Blood will tell you it's owed your trust because it shares your name. It isn't owed anything. Trust is earned at the kitchen table over years, in the small true things a person does when they think nobody's keeping score. My son shared my blood and emptied my life. My daughter-in-law shared none of it and handed me back my dignity in a folded napkin. So every Saturday I drive over and drink her bad coffee, and I watch my grandkids on the floor in their pajamas, and I think about how close I came to signing it all away with a smile on my face. And I am thankful, in a quiet, bruised way, that somebody at that table loved the truth enough to risk everything to tell it to me. That's family. Not the name. Not the blood. The one who tells you to check when checking is the last thing you want to do. For a long time after the sentencing, I kept circling back to one small thing. The moment my own son slid into the chair at the head of my table, and I never noticed when it happened. That was the whole story in miniature. The theft didn't start with a forged signature. It started years earlier, with 1,000 quiet times I handed over a little more trust than was earned and never asked for it back. Money drained out of my retirement, because before that, judgment had drained out of me. Cause and effect. I let comfort do my thinking, and comfort is the most expensive habit a man can keep. What saved me wasn't luck. Hannah did the right thing when the easy thing was sitting right next to her, married to her, the father of her kids. She could have looked away and kept her whole life intact. Instead, she chose the harder road because she couldn't live with being the kind of person who stays quiet while an old man gets robbed. That choice cost her plenty, and she made it anyway, and watching her make it taught me more about what a person is worth than 40 years of working did. But being decent wasn't enough on its own. Hannah caught Bryce because she paid attention when something felt off, kept records, asked the slow, careful questions instead of the comfortable ones. She didn't just feel that something was wrong. She did the work to know it. And then there was the part nobody sees, the 5 weeks I had to lie to my son's face on the phone and keep going, the year of court dates, the empty house I had to sell, and the parts counter I stand behind 3 days a week now. None of that took cleverness. It just took getting up the next morning when I didn't want to, and the next until the worst of it was behind me. So if you take anything from an old man who got robbed by his own boy, take these 3. Be the person who tells the truth when silence would be easier, because the day will come when somebody you love needs you to be brave instead of comfortable. Stay sharp. Keep your own eyes on your own affairs. Ask the question that makes the room uncomfortable, because trust without attention is just an unlocked door. And when life knocks the floor out from under you, get back up and keep walking. Even smaller, even slower, even alone, because a life you control is worth more than a fortune somebody else controls for you. Bryce had my blood. Hannah had my back. I'd give back every dollar I lost to have known the difference sooner. I didn't, but I know it now. And at 67, that's not nothing. That's almost everything.